Welcome, guys, to those of you that are watching. And as you can see, Byron and Sam and Zach are here with us. And now I'm here. So God bless you guys. Welcome to those of you that are watching again. Make sure you subscribe, follow, drop us a line. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them. We'll be glad to address them. So today we're just kind of talking about Onward to the Promise. And this is like really in my face. I like zoom in. So talking about Onward to the Promise, and I was just thinking about the story of Israel when they left Israel. We kind of shared this in the past, but when Israel left Egypt, that's what I meant. When Israel left Egypt, and they were on their way to Canaan, because Canaan was their promised land. Sorry, Canaan was their promised land. In fact, it wasn't the promised land. They were actually returning to the land from which they were originally in, which is given to Abraham, the father of the people of Israel, right? So Canaan is a place where they were returning to, which was really the promised land for them. And so we read the story of how they're walking towards Canaan after they left Egypt, and they confront and they enter across the Red Sea. We read about that on Exodus 14. And essentially what's happening here is they're headed out, and they essentially are headed, and they're about to encounter the Red Sea. And they don't know what's happening. So in Exodus 14:15, we read that Moses is crying out to God, like, what are we doing in this situation? Moses already told the people of Israel, like, don't be afraid, stand firm. The Lord is with you. He's going to be fighting for you. He's going to work for you today. You'll never see the Egyptians ever again, right? And so Moses is also crying out to God. And in Exodus 14:15, God responds to Moses in the following. In Exodus 14:15, it says, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen.'" So what's going on with this situation? So Israel essentially is kind of freaking out, because they're like, oh man, the Egyptians are coming after us. They're on our tail. They're coming after after us, the people of Israel. And the Lord tells Moses, like, dude, essentially, why are you crying out to me? Just keep going forward. Just do what you were supposed to, keep moving. And so what was happening with Moses is that he was being paralyzed by fear. He was being paralyzed by doubt. He was being paralyzed by a lot of things. And it's, I guess, if you were to put yourself in that situation, it would kind of make sense from a human emotion perspective, because you're walking towards a big body of water, and there's no bridge, and there's no boats, and there's no Israeli Navy back then or anything of that sort to help them cross the Red Sea on boats. And so Moses and the people of Israel must have been like, dude, how are we supposed to go over this? Like, how are we supposed to get across this nation? And so God literally tells Moses, why are you stopping? Just keep moving forward. Just go ahead and move forward with it. And so that is something that, like, happens to a lot of the people of God. Like, we're told that God's going to give us something. God's going to give us promises. And God's going to fulfill his promises. And we let our human emotion, human thought, or human expectation, because you think things are going to go one way, and maybe your way is not the way. In fact, our way is not the way. It's his way that matters. And so you can do all you can try under the sun, but if it wasn't God's plan, he's gonna put obstacles also in the way. All right, he's gonna to kind of give you a heads up, like, pay attention. This is not the right way that you're going. This is not the right path that you're going. Let me redirect your paths, right? It reminds me of the verse in the Bible that talks about how knock and it will be open, ask and you shall receive, seek and you will find, right? The situation in that is that if God does not open the door, stop trying to knock it down, because as much as you try to knock it down, it's not going to open. It's not going to open. And you get stuck trying to knock open the same door, and to get open the same door, you get stuck trying to find when there's nothing to be found there, and you keep asking, and you don't receive, as James says, because you keep asking for your own passions. And so what happens also a lot of the times to people, on the people of God, as we are sometimes, is we keep knocking on the same door, and we spend 20 years knocking on the door and it's not opening, and you're like, move on. God's been telling you for 20 years, like, hey, like, obviously be in connection with God so you can know the heart of God for that moment, because there's also the patience of God. But a lot of the times people are stuck knocking on the same door that is not meant for them, and God's been talking to them using, the 5 ministries, using dreams, visions, creation itself, everything around us. And the Holy Spirit, most importantly, that dwells in us to tell you, move on, but you keep being stubborn. You're like a stubborn mule in the same spot. While everyone is advanced, you're still stuck in the same door, right? And so that happens to a lot of us. And also, it's like we keep digging for gold when there's no gold there. It's like you've been digging and you're like at bedrock, and you're like, no, but I'm going to keep going because after this, there's going to be gold. And God's been telling you, no, there's nothing there. Move on. Move on.
Question.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think all of us at one point have experienced, like maybe a dream or a calling that you feel maybe like was confirmation from God, but necessarily wasn't, based on how many doors are closing. Like, I guess aside from discernment, because obviously discernment is something that you have to like sharpen and you have to learn how to use. Is there any other tellers that maybe that so-called dream or calling or desire that you deeply wanted was maybe confused with your initial thought, thinking that it was God doing it instead of yourself? Like maybe something you just convinced yourself so heavily of. Is there a way to unravel that a lot earlier than just discernment,
Yeah. And so what I would say to that is, well, I always say that one of the things that comes with God, sorry, I'm just pulling up the verse here, but one of the things that comes up with God is that God is a God of peace. And so where there is no peace, that's not from God. And God would not put you in a situation to get anger, to get saddened, to get distraught, full of anxiety, all the different negative emotions that we can suffer as men and women of God. Yeah. But not only that, but also, God forbid that you're put in a position of feeding to the works of the flesh. Like, God's got me in a place where I'm lusting, and a place where I'm stealing, and a place where I'm lying, and when I'm doing witchcraft and sorcery. And it's like, those are the works of the flesh. God would never lead you into temptation. He leads you through trials, but not through temptations. He doesn't tempt you. God does not tempt. Only the enemy tempts. Because the enemy's goal is to lie, to steal, kill, and destroy.
I think a question, or probably a good example, would be social pressures. I think that's a good example of the enemy. We think, because I have to be married by a certain age. I have to be married, or I have to have a certain job or a certain degree or have finished. And so we fall into temptation, or we want to rush things.
Yeah, and a lot of the times we try to do things out of time, but that are good, but that's still not right. What did I say? So I use marriage as the example. You just brought it up, Byron. So like, marriage is a good thing, but if it's not your time to be getting married, if it's not God's time for you, you're forcing it.
And you want to make sure that you're equally yoked.
Yeah, equally yoked. Yeah, because and God is a God of grace and mercy. So He does show mercy and grace. He does put a lot of obstacles, but we ignore them. And then I think on Bible study on Wednesday, I was saying that we're foolish that we do this 50% of the time. It's the enemy sometimes, like literally like tempting us, and then the other 50% is the consequences of our actions. And then we jump into things that are not our time to be in, and then we're wondering why our marriage is difficult, like falling apart, like love does not exist in our marriage, or having kids out of time, right? Kids raising kids, right? Unfortunately nowadays. In places we shouldn't be, and things that we shouldn't be. And so the enemy kind of does two things to us. He like tempts us to do things that are not in the will of God, That's one thing. And then the other thing that happens is we tend to do things out of time. So we have to learn how to do what is in the will of God and what is in the time of God.
Yeah.
And everyone just likes to focus on the will of God, but doesn't ignores the part about the timing of God. And so everyone's jumping into things they should not be jumping into. And because of God's permissive will, he lets us choose, and then we suffer consequences. And they're like, and then we're like, why am I in this situation? Because you're out of time. So what do I say? Because Adam and Eve, the enemy tempted Eve in two things. First, twisted up God's words. And then second, he made it look good. For example, he says, God knows that if you eat of this fruit, you're going to be like him. But we should desire to be godly. We should be desired to be shaped in the image of, in the man of heaven. And we were created in the image of God, as in Genesis talks about. So it was a good, like, goal to try to be like God, but not like surpass him. We should be made in the image of him. So I'm getting this up in the sense of a lot of the times we want to do good things out of time. And our impatience gets us in trouble.
Yeah.
And then we go down a rabbit hole. And then we want to go asking for help, and God's going to help us. But the climb from a 20, 30, 40-foot hole takes longer than a climb out of 6 inches, right? 6 inches is not even a climb, it's just a hop, right? Not even a hop, just a step.
Yeah.
But then we're like 20, 30, 40 feet deep, or 20, 30, 40, 50 years deep. And then we're like, oh, I messed up 20 years ago. Or like Israel, we messed up 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And a whole generation was lost. And so I want to just give you the verse, 1 Corinthians 14:33. 1 Corinthians 14:33 is the verse that says, for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. So for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. And so when God directs, when God guides us, he's pretty clear in what he's saying. And a lot of the times it's not just like the voice of God saying, choose red, choose right, choose left, stop, look forward, go to the left on the next street. No, a lot of the times it's the circumstances around situations where God is making the path easy, the path of least resistance from God, right? Like when we see we have to choose between a cross between left and right, if choosing left is going to bring us down to confusion, heartache, destruction, distraught, anxiety, depression, all the negative emotions, but choosing right is a free and clear path that God's opening for us. He's lining up all the pieces and they're slowly and beautifully falling into place. That's probably most likely the path that God is opening for you, because God is a God of not a God of confusion, but a God of peace. And so when there is confusion, there is distraught, there's anxiety, and all the negative emotions that come with bad situations, it's usually not from God, if that makes sense. And so we have to be very careful to stop trying to open doors that God has locked.
Yeah.
Because as much as you try, you're not going to break them open. And you know what's funny? You keep stuck at the same door, and the enemy's going to build a secret little door next to it. And you're going to be like, oh, here's the entry. This is the way. And it's going to confuse you even more.
Yeah.
And then it's a door that doesn't fit you. It just literally reminds me of the story of Alice in Wonderland, right? It's like she couldn't fit through the little tiny door. If you remember that story of Alice in Wonderland, she had to take a piece of, she had a little piece of cake and that shrunk her, right?
Which the doorknob says anything is impossible.
Is that what it is?
Or I think it says everything's impossible, nothing's impassable. Right?
Oh, is that what it says with the...
I think it's, I said it backwards. It's
in
been a while
the
since I saw
Alice
it.
in Wonderland? Yeah, it's such an old tale. But yeah, so... a lot of the times we try to force our way through a door that wasn't meant for you. The door's too big or the door's too small. And when God opens the door, he opens it widely and it's clear. And it's usually through confirmation.
I think it's important to also realize, like, sometimes, and I know this isn't the word, but our heart is deceiving, and it can be. And I think, imagine how much time you harped up on something that you thought was from God, and clearly there's no peace, there's no, will and time of God that He's established for you. And He's been waiting for you to get out of that rut for like 20 years because He had a bigger promise for you on the other side. Like, what if what you thought was the promise, because obviously it wasn't, but God had something even bigger and you just chose to stay stuck in your 20 years? Like, sometimes I wonder why we harp up on things too easily. And because they pull at your heartstrings, right? Because our heart is deceiving, maybe. And there's people who I know have been waiting for a child, and they're just barren. And so they're not able to actually have children, but instead, God has been putting the youth in their path, being able to be an assistance at church to direct the youth. And maybe that was the calling of what God had promised the children for her to be handling, not her own, So I think but she spent a long time remembering the promise that she thought was having her own child instead of coming to terms with being able to care for the other children in the Word of God, And that was just like a distinction that it came some time. Imagine how early she would have just switched over to the mentality change, how much bigger the blessing would have been now, It's just sometimes the time that we hop on the train with God is a little wonky on our end.
Yeah, and it brings to mind, like, when speaking of God's timing, and like harking on things is Ecclesiastes 3:1. There's a time for everything under the heaven, right? And then Ecclesiastes 3:11, also in the same section. And I'm gonna read them because no one likes to read Ecclesiastes, I feel like, because it's like the most depressing verses in the Bible. It's a book. Yeah, 3:11. So it's actually all of Ecclesiastes 3, right? But Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven." So there's a time for every season. So there's a lot of people out there that are frustrated because you're doing things out of season. It's not your season. And then there are people out there that are doing things in God's season, and then it's your season, and run full steam ahead, right? Go for it. And it says I'm going to read all of 3:2, 3:8. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. So there's a time to plant, right? If you sow sparingly, you're going to reap sparingly. So when it's a time to plant, sow abundantly. So then when it's time to pick up what is planted, you can sow abundantly. Reap abundantly. So sow abundantly, reap abundantly. Sow sparingly, reap sparingly. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. I always love that part of verse 3, when it says a time to break down and then a time to build up. It's interesting how it lists on the need to destroy things first in order for God to build us up. So talking about this is sometimes God's trying to knock all the bad out of you, so then He can build up the better you.
And I wanted to maybe also specify, like, sometimes as humans, we probably confuse those trials as unpeaceful. And so we might confuse it as like, no, this is of the enemy. This is not of God. Like, I think we sometimes do that too frequently. And God is just like, no. I'm just making a new level. I'm making a clear level for us to begin on. Like, the foundation is there, but we built a little wonky along the way. You did some stuff. Let's take it down and restart. No. And there's something that, I mean, I don't know about you, but as a musician, someone who's musically involved, whenever we messed up, the better option was to restart immediately before reinforcing the habit. And sometimes we think, oh, I messed up, but it's okay. Like, we're just going to keep going. No, go back, don't reinforce the habit, restart, and we'll go from there. I don't know. I just thought it was, compares to what life is going on.
Tornado warning.
Right.
Sorry.
Ears are open.
Yeah, it did. It
did
did.
go off.